That is, well, it's the biggest book that I've ever come across on the show, that I've ever had a cause to read and review and discuss on the show. It's called The Road to Glenlaw, as in Glenlaw, Glencolmkill. And it's written by Francie Gillespie, who I think is originally from, we'll find out now in just a second, but I think originally from that part of the world, but lives here just practically down the road here at Curleys, or across the road. Anyhow, Christy's here in the studio with me. Christy, good afternoon to you.
Hello, John. How are you doing?
Good. You are originally from Glencolmkill?
No, I'm not.
No.
I'm next door in Kilcar, and if you had to say that years ago when the football was going, that would not be a good start. But close enough. Close enough, yeah.
Fair enough. The road to Glenlaw. Now let's deal with the issue of the size first of all, because I'm looking at this book and I'm thinking, you need to be mad to bring out a book that size. But then I was looking through it yesterday, and it's very accessible because to the casual observer it looks daunting. But you know what? Even if you've a passing interest in the area, in Irish history, in art history, and a couple of the subjects that's dealt with, like Rockwell Kent and so on, this is perfect because I don't know maybe it's the writing, maybe it's the photographs, maybe it's the way it's all laid out, but it's for a huge book, it's very accessible.
Yeah, well, it's actually, when you put numbers on it, it's 684 pages, and there's 900 images in it. And Una Mathewson, the head librarian, said to me last week, now I don't know whether this is right or not, but it's the biggest book was ever produced on Donegal. But
I well believe it.
Yeah, but I mean, the history of the valley is so vast and so interesting that it had to be done a certain way. And I suppose the central character in the book is Rockwell Kent, who was in the 20s and 30s maybe the most famous and saleable artist in America. And one of the big things for me when I started out in the book was to try and track his Irish artworks from all over the world. There was around the 100, and so it was important to get all of those into the book. But a fellow called Anthony Delap, I'm sure a lot of the listeners would know him well. Anthony came up to collect his book last week. He couldn't wait for the book launch, and when he lifted it, he said, God, the last time I lifted a book this heavy, I was an altar boy.
All right. Well, it gives people an idea of just how big it is, yeah. And the only book you were mentioning there just off air, the only book by comparison in size would have been the one that came out a few years back for the what was it called, Revolution?
Well, one of them was the Atlas of the Revolution, and the other was the Atlas of the Irish Famine, done by the Cork University Press. And in that same stable, you would have the likes of the Atlas of Donegal as well. So it's in that size, and it's also in that style as well, a very uncluttered style where the images had to be high quality. And I suppose what I was always trying to do with the designers of the book at the time was to make sure that the images flow with the text, because what drives me crazy, I don't know about yourself, John, but when you're reading a book and you come on a couple of pages of photographs, and then they're telling you to go back and look at that, refer to 5 pages ago, that just always drove me insane.
It is annoying, yeah. So none of that. No, carry on.
None of that at all.
And it's you've got a lot of pictures, obviously, of Rockwell Kent's art, but you also have a lot of pictures from the area, from Glenlaw and just the wider area, Teelan and Glencolmkill. Yeah. From way back from like the 30s and 40s and even earlier. I mean, Rockwell Kent himself took some photographs when he was there.
He did. Well, I suppose when we set out on the book first, and I worked very hard with Brown printers from day one, and Seamus Brown and all there were fantastic. But I worked with the designer Anna Polak, and we kind of felt from moment one that the book had to be very visual, and for 2 reasons really. To my mind, I think Glenlaw's the most beautiful place in Ireland. It's very inaccessible, but it's on the kind of the same scale as Slieve League, but the only difference being it's 2 hours from the nearest road. So, accessibility is not easy. But when you get in there for the first time ever, you have a huge glacial lake up at the top, and then there's a river coming from that falls and steps out into the sea at what's known as Prince Charlie's Cove now, in deference to the supposed royal visitor that came in the 1700s. But then when you move around the bay a bit as well, then you've got the largest raised beach in Ireland, and out from you have a set of sea stacks, including the biggest in Ireland, the Tormore. So
you're selling it. You're definitely selling it.
Yeah,
I've been down to Port, but never over there. So
when you park at Port, then you're talking another 2 hours walk and over the mountains. So when you get in for the very first time ever, what kind of shocks you is the fact that there's the remains of two houses there. They must be easily the most remote in Ireland. So people were living there for 2 centuries and coming and going. So when they were coming out of the place, they were carrying stuff. When they were going back in, they were carrying stuff. But the other reason I wanted it very much to be visual is because the central character was a consummate artist. And so there was no other way. If you had to write this story and left the images out, it just wouldn't have been the same, because one kind of complements the other.
And a brilliant artist he was as well, and writer. Yeah. And you feature both his artwork and some of his writings in the book. You devote a lot of time to Rockwell Kent. We'll get to him in just a second, but also Bonnie Prince Charlie.
Yes. That's the big mystery of the book, in that 1746 was a seminal year in Great Britain. You had the Stuart uprising, where Bonnie Prince Charlie came to Scotland and gathered the clans there to try and get the thrones back for the Stuart family. And they did very well for a time, attacked down through England, got as far as Derby, but then his chieftains wouldn't go any further. And so they retreated back to Scotland, and they were very roundly beaten then at the Battle of Culloden outside of Inverness. And so started then the biggest manhunt in British history, where they were trying to locate him, and there was £10,000 on his head at the time, which was a huge amount of money. And his followers brought him out onto the islands, and there was a real game of cat and mouse going on there for a long time. But eventually he was spirited back onto the mainland, and it's here that the Irish and the Scottish versions diversify, in that in the Scottish version, he goes back to the mainland, which to my mind was tantamount to suicide. Mm-hmm. In the Irish version, you have him coming in at an Inishowen, works his way down through Glenswilly, and eventually this stranger turns up with his manservant in Glenlaw, 1746, never reveals while he's in the parish who he is, and eventually after a month he's rescued by a French ship and taken back to mainland France. Now you might ask, well, why a French ship? But at that time, Glenlaw was the centre of a lucrative smuggling venture, where tobacco used to come in from the continent, and it was landed in Glenlaw because it was so remote, and then it was dispersed right throughout the county. So once the stranger left, about maybe a month or two later, news even came into that remote valley about what had happened in Scotland. Mm-hmm. And suddenly the realisation came on the people that they had been graced by the presence of royalty for that month before. And so at night time, sitting around the hearth and that, they would relate stories about how he had been helped and harboured. And then a Protestant minister called Valentine Poole Griffith came to the parish in 1852, and he interviewed all of these families that, had a connection with the stranger, and he wrote it all down in a very long letter that he sent to his Archbishop in Dublin. So it's all recorded. So it was
many years later, but there were still people who remembered him, or
So I mean, it'll be probably a mystery forever. But when you realise things like what I've discovered since, that during the rebellion, his secretary was John Murray of Broughton, and the Murrays of Broughton were the landlords of Kilcar and Killybeg surrounding Glencullen. So when you start to look at facts like that, you suddenly start to think, well, hold on here a minute.
Okay. There's even a famous coin that he gave him payment and offered payment. It wasn't that he was tight or anything, or didn't expect to be given great lodging and service for nothing, because he offered up. And this payment passed down through the generations.
Yeah, on the very last night, and again, this was recorded maybe 150 years ago now, this tale, where he went to a house in Minacrosh, which would be on the way back into Glenlaw. And the lady of the house had no great English, so she put him to bed. And she tried to converse with him, and she said, bed, ganyusel, hoim a sleep ditch, which means, bed, sir, I have sorted out a slumber down for you. Yeah. And then to the neighbours who had gathered into the house, she said, Tashin the Lee and the Shugus Nil Reberla in Minacrosha, as the Curfus in the Thea. He's now in bed, and there's not enough English in Minacrosh that would waken him again. And the following morning, he gave a gold coin to the family, and that passed down through the generations to the last of the name, Paddy John Wyatt McGinley. And he used to take it out proudly when he would go to the pubs and that. And the locals, rather good humouredly but disparagingly, used to call it Liffing John Paddy or his halfpenny.
Very good, very good. Well, Rockwell Kent, the artist, well known artist and writer in the United States, one of the most important of the early part of the last century, made his way to Glenlaw. How did he ever find Glenlaw?
Well, his modus operandi always was to go to very remote areas around the world, the likes of Greenland, Alaska, Newfoundland, Tierra del Fuego, and he would go as far from the madding crowd as he could.
And live with locals.
Live with the locals, try and find an area that was very monumental, where you had the cliffs, the sea, and the more monumental the better. But then when he would be there, he would live the life of the locals. And once he would understand their lifestyle a lot better, he would then commit it to canvas. And he was a realist, I suppose, in the purest terms. And while he was in Glenlough, what took him to Glenlough was he was on a second honeymoon with his second wife, Frances. And I suppose it was a bit of a compromise, really. He was well used to Spartan life and he enjoyed it, whereas for Frances, she was probably a wee bit more delicate. So the compromise was to come to Ireland.
Beautiful as it is, not the first place you'd think of for a honeymoon.
No, but it wasn't planned in any shape or form. They got as far as Glenties, which was Rail's End.
So what you're saying is he might not have known about it until he got here.
Oh, not a clue. He just went north, which was always his inclination, and then when he took the rail as far as it went that time to the station in Glenties, they climbed a hill outside of Glenties the following morning. They saw Glenhead for the first time. He thought, that's where I'm going. So on their first night staying in Glencolumkill, they were talking to the locals, and the locals told them to go to Port, the wee fishing village of Port that you were talking about a while ago. And when he met the McGinley family there, and he became very friendly with them eventually, Dennis was a fisherman and the famous poaching maker of the area. But they advised him, no, if you go in to the next valley, we think that's where you're looking for. So they landed into Dan and Rose Ward, and Kent often described it afterwards as the happiest time of his life, where there was no other accommodation there, but he was a trained architect, and so he fixed up a cowshed that Dan had been using.
A buyer.
And then he fixed up another one as his studio, and so there they lived for the next 5 months.
Lived in one. This is the newly married couple. Lived in one and worked in the other.
And then he, like as you were saying earlier, he did he really seemed to tune in to the people of the area very easily and tuned into their wry sense of humour. And straight away he was helping them with their gathering of sheep and their shearing. He was helping the building of Dan Ward's stack. He would go out to do the lobster fishing, all of that. And with that, you can see that realism in the paintings that he produced at the time. And a lot of experts would now agree that, his Irish oeuvre is among the very best that he ever did.
Dan Ward's stack, a very famous one. And also a famous picture of Annie McGinley.
Annie McGinley, yes. Well, Annie... His wife went back a month early to America because she had to source an apartment and a studio because they were just newly married. He decided to stay on to finish his work, but now he needed somebody to do the washing and the cleaning and the tidying up and suppose female company and so on. So Annie, who was Dennis's daughter, became, I suppose you could say in a sense, a replacement for Frances. And of course, straight away the rumour started that there was an affair in it, which there's no basis to it whatsoever. But it wasn't helped, I suppose, when he did this tribute painting of her. She never sat for the painting, but he did it in tribute to her, and it's one of the most. It's on the cover of the book, and it's definitely one of the most beautiful of the paintings.
Absolutely, yeah, she looks beautiful. You got a lot of information from chatting to Francie Gillespie, no longer with us, but he was a minefield of information.
He was a character in every way. I mean, to go up to Francie for an afternoon, it was just a great experience in every way. And
how old was he when Rockwell Kent was there?
He was 10. And I suppose when you put it into perspective now, you're nearly talking a century. And that's why not just the paintings, but the writings and the photographs are so important now, because really when you take them all together, it's a wonderful depiction of Ireland just as we were taking our first steps towards autonomy after the Civil War. But Francie was a gas character. And when I was interviewing him, he was in his early 90s. And one of the days I was telling Francie about the photographs and that, and I took him in and he was pointing himself out in the photographs and everybody else that was there at the stack that day. And later on then I brought him up the finished product, a copy of the painting itself. And of course it features 6 adults, putting the finishing touches to a stack. And I showed it to Francie, gave it to him as a kind of a wee present, and Francie studied it for a while, and then he looked up and he says, the bugger, he never put me in.
So he took the boy out.
He'd taken the boy out. But Francie could be very, very funny because, as I told you, Kent's accommodation was a cowshed. And he waxes lyrical in one of his autobiographies about how beautiful it was, and people were coming from all over to see the beautiful little house and so on. So I asked Francie about it because Francie would have seen it at the time, and Francie says, no, I didn't think much of it. It was easy to please him, really. To be honest, he says, you wouldn't have put a cow in it.
Yeah, because I'm just getting the picture about how remote it is, and here's a newly married couple, and it's just the basic of basic is what they would have had to survive on.
Very much so.
Those months. How many months did you say? 6 months.
Well, for Francis it was 4. For him it was 5.
Yeah. And just to sort of round out the story of Rockwell Kent, he did come back, but it wasn't easy because in the intervening years he was a socialist and a communist, and this was the McCarthy era. And at one stage he went looking for, and you tell all this in the book, he went to get his passport renewed to come back to Ireland.
Well, you see, what happened is, and it's a misconception that a lot of people have, Kent was an ardent socialist, but he was a socialist in terms of trying to make sure that poor people were well looked after and that they were getting an honest wage for an honest day's work. And often that wasn't the case in America. Some people then kind of append to that he was a communist. But he said on oath on quite a number of occasions that he was never a communist, and he didn't like it as an ethos because it was a whole country thing, and he didn't like he always liked the idea that a person had to be have freedom. And in communism, you never had freedom. But what had happened was that, like in the 20s and early 30s, he was the most famous and saleable artist in America. He worked beside Dennis Hopper. And he was outselling Hopper at that time. And Hopper's last painting went for 75 million. So, like, Kent fell off the face of the earth as far as, being a known artist. Now, why? Because he was a socialist, which was kind of accepted right up until the end of the Second World War. But then what happened after the Second World War was you had the Cold War started, where Russia and America were trying to assert themselves in the new order. And so if you were a socialist, then you were a communist. And if you were a communist, then you were supporting Russia. So people like Rockwell Kent and other people that not alone were they socialists, but also trying to work in, for peace in the world. And anybody that was in that situation...
all got labelled as communists.
Yes, and what happened then was that your right to travel was taken from you. So Kent got communicating with the owner of the valley, Dan Ward, in 1951, and Dan told him that himself and his wife were leaving the valley because they were getting too old and they need to be closer to a church and shops and so on. So he told Kent that he would take £200 for the whole thing, and Kent jumped at this opportunity, made an application for what he thought would just be a routine, application for a visa. But like thousands of others in America at that time, he was refused his right to travel. And so started a long legal case that went the whole way to the Supreme Court. And eventually he won. And he was the first person ever in America to take his country for the right to travel. And it's a very important case to this day because you or me can't be refused the right to travel because of our politics, our religion, or our ethnicity. And that's written into the legislature now of all countries in the world. And as soon as he got his passport back, he came back to Ireland one last time to meet Dan Ward, to meet Annie McGinley of the painting, to meet all his old friends. But by then, the valley had been sold. And so that great opportunity was gone, sadly.
Sadly, is right. Time is very much beaten us. Dylan Thomas, very briefly, Dylan Thomas, the great Welsh poet, also spent time.
He did indeed. He came in as a 20-year-old. His literary agent brought him there, trying to get him as far away as he could from the bright lights of London. Little did he realise he was taking him into the poaching-making capital of Donegal. But again, he spent a summer there, and despite everything, he used Glenlough and the inspiration and quietness that it gave him to produce a second collection of poetry, including some very famous poems like "And Death Shall Have No Dominion." So, but then at the end of the summer, as was going to be his pattern for the rest of his life, he kind of got bored and lonely, and he decided he would head away, and up he left one morning. And I detail all this in a chapter that I call Welshing in Glenlough, where he up and left without even saying goodbye and without paying, and headed away with no intentions of coming back.
Okay. It's all detailed at great length in the book, and it is a wonderful book because not only all that information and so much more about Glenlough and some of the characters that visited there down through the years, but also brilliant photographs and illustrations and reproductions of Rockwell Kent's art. Just a mention for the launch. There's There's a launch actually tomorrow night.
There's one tonight first. Tonight at 6:30 down here in the Central Library.
Okay.
And then tomorrow night in Ardra in the Parochial Centre at 8 o'clock. And the reason why I'm kind of getting it out and around that way is it is so big, it is kind of hard to post and so on. So if you can bring it out where people can come, get their copy and take, it's kind of nearly the only way to do it, really.
Well, I'm telling you, when you see it and you flick through it, you'll be won over. Francie Gillespie, author of The Road to Glenlough, thank you very much.
Listen, thank you so much for having me, John.
Around the Northwest, brought to you by Errigal Arts Festival, Donegal's premier summer event on the Wild Atlantic Way from July 8th to 23rd. Visit eaf.ie.
At Centra, shop smart and feel good with great offers this week, like Centra Fresh Irish Beef Round Roast 1 kilo only €10, Kitten Soft Toilet Tissue 24 roll, and Surf Tropical Lily 45 wash €10 each, and Screaming Devil Cote de Provence Rosé only €12. Centra, live every day. Enjoy alcohol sensibly.
Dreaming of a getaway this summer? There's still time to book with TUI, flying from Dublin, Cork and Shannon airports. Summer, best enjoyed on holiday. TUI, live happy.
Are you tired of how you feel? Despite diet and exercise, are you struggling to lose weight? Do you need help to achieve your weight loss goals? At Letterkenny Medics Private Clinic, we are offering a free consultation to ascertain if you are suitable for treatment on our weight management program. All consultations are confidential and completed by an experienced doctor. We are open 7 days per week from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. to facilitate your needs. To book an appointment, go to letterkennymedics.ie. Letterkenny Medics. We listen if you want to talk.
At Hickey, Clark and Langan Insurance Brokers, they compare quotes from all the leading insurers, so you get a great price. Home, motor and van, farm, holiday home, travel and liability insurance, they quote them all. So if the worst happens, you're covered. For a competitive insurance quote today, call Hickey, Clark and Langan on 9126688 or pop into their office at Ballymacool, Letterkenny. Hickey, Clark and Langan General Insurances Limited, trading as Hickey, Clark and Langan, is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
Highland Radio time checks with Expressway. Travel Route 32 from Letterkenny to Dublin when you book online and travel for less. Expressway, bringing you the time at...
Well, it's 2:30. The clock most definitely has beaten me. David's up next. And my thanks to Christy. And thanks for listening. Back again tomorrow at 12 on Around the Northwest. And thanks to Niamh for producing the show today. As always, chat to you tomorrow at 12. Bye.
Around the Northwest, brought to you by Errigal Arts Festival. 2 weeks of music, dance, theatre, visual arts and circus. July 8th to 23rd. Visit eaf.ie.
McDade's Bathroom Plumbing and Tile Showroom in Buncrana is your one-stop solution for all your bathroom plumbing and tile needs. We offer a wide range of top-quality plumbing fixtures, tiles and accessories, all at the best possible price. Our experienced plumbing experts will help you choose the right products for your bathroom, renovation, new construction or remodelling project. Visit McDade's Bathroom Plumbing and Tiles in Buncrana and see why we are the best choice for all your bathroom and plumbing and tile needs.
Are you tired of working from home with constant distractions? Don't let the summer chaos hinder your productivity. Join G-Tech Digital Hub today. Say goodbye to the house full of people and hello to working on your own terms. G-Tech Digital Hub, Termon and Carrigart. Call 074 91 54 291 to secure your spot.
Tá mudna in ESB Networks ag gobar lena chintu go bhfuil síl glán letrach in ándún go léir in éireann. Agus mar chud san chlór náisiúnta an méadrú cliste, tá méadid cliste letrachas á sitsálinis agan i cheantar. A bhuichas is beag billa measta a dheofatú. Cáir se leat súla chuineal ar an méid letrachas a úsáidin tú ar bhealach níos fearr, agus ba fáil agad ar thorgaí agus seirbhísí cliste. Déanam mit sangó leat ribh hitsal de bhéidir. Tá tuile ólis le fáil ag esbnetworks.ie/smart meter.
Hi folks, Nathan Carter here. Join us for the summer sessions at the Copper Tap in Omer on the 22nd of July. Special guests include Kjol, Justin McGurk and many more. Tickets now on sale.
Broadcasting throughout the Northwest and across the world online. This is Highland Radio.
2:30 till 5 weekdays on Highland Radio. It's the Jive Time Show with David James.
It's 2:30 in the afternoon. Jive